benefits of switching to a platform like Loxo, centralizing your data and having this like really solid source of truth. This becomes really, really important when we start to leverage AI in any capacity, because if you don't have good data, you cannot get good insights, and AI is powered by the data that you're feeding it. Can't state this enough. I'm sorry to beat a dead horse, but you need to start with centralizing and cleaning up your data.
Initiating becoming a hiring machine sequence in 3, 2, 1.
Hey everyone, it's Sam Keenley, and welcome back to Becoming a Hiring Machine. This is the show dedicated to fixing recruitment by going beyond saying what needs to change and instead teaches you how to make that change. Today, we've got a great trending topics episode ahead of us, but before we get into that, I want to tell you a little bit about the show. Essentially, we have shows within the show here. Some days we have interviews with industry thought leaders and others who are shaking up the space, while other days like today, we cover trending topics. Stop by every Tuesday for our Tactical Tuesday episode where we go deep on how to do something that's going to help you drive better results in your day-to-day. And occasionally you get a mic drop episode from Matt where he shares something that he's been thinking about within the recruitment space and wants you to know. Now, as a reminder, if you like the content that we share here on the show, make sure that you subscribe for more. All right, everyone, it's Trending Topics. You know what that means. Your favorite co-host, Lex, is here to join us with some recent, interesting items that are making the rounds in the recruitment sphere. So what do we have going on today, Lex?
Yeah, so I'm super excited about this. For anyone who does not receive Hung Lee's newsletter in your inbox, it's fantastic. Highly recommend that you sign up for Hung's newsletter. He does a great job of aggregating things that are happening in the space and starting really good conversations. Mm-hmm. So it's not necessarily just, hey, here's some things you need to know, but like, what does the community think about this? And does a great job of kind of sourcing that feedback in real time. Highly recommend that. We learn a lot from Hung and from his just all of his information on a weekly basis. So
that's Recruiting Brain Food. If you need to search Recruiting Brain Food. He's got a Facebook group as well. Yeah, and he does a great job of like live panels on LinkedIn on Fridays. So highly recommend giving him a follow if you haven't already. I'm sure a lot of our listeners already follow Hung, but Recruiting Brain Food is fantastic. So in either the most recent or the one right before that, he shared a really interesting slide deck from Laszlo Bock, which is such a cool name, by the way. Laszlo is a 2-time founder, and he was also senior vice president of people ops at Google at one point. And he does a really fantastic slide deck on the impact of AI on the future of work. And now, obviously, we've talked a lot on this podcast about the future of work, about AI's potential and, demonstrated impact on the way that we work and the way that we will in the future. But this is kind of more of a conversation around how, in a very practical way, we start to incorporate AI into our workflows. Bock kind of hypothesizes that a lot of organizations are kind of making this false equivalency between causation and correlation and are potentially making rather costly mistakes in the process. They're kind of saying, AI is going to change everything, and so therefore we'll just start using AI without real strategy and intention. And I think that this conversation feels really important to me in terms of how do we use AI effectively? How do we prove its effectiveness? And how do we kind of start to experiment a bit in a way that helps us understand when and where using AI in our process becomes really important and where right now, at least, it's not. So I love this kind of conversation. Hopefully you guys will like it too. Oh, yeah. This sounds familiar. What's your workflow look like? Something that we talk about a little bit here and there, and when to do things. So this is very relevant and timely.
Yes. And one thing I will say is I will link Laszlo's post in the show notes because we're just touching on a very small portion of it around experimentation and how to get good at experimenting. He goes on a full deep dive of a lot of the problems that organizations are facing when it comes to integrating AI into their workflow. And so highly recommend you take the time to just like really absorb this resource as a whole. Today, though, for the purpose of this conversation, we're just going to talk about experimenting with AI and how to do that with some structure so that you can actually learn from those experiments.
I like it. All right, let's dive in.
Okay, so in one section of this deck, Laszlo focuses in on building blocks that will help prepare you for AI success. So he lists out a couple of building blocks, and the first one is to clean and centralize your data. Garbage in, garbage out. We've learned this lesson a million times, and we talk about this a lot on the pod. Obviously, this is something that we talk about as one of the hint benefits of switching to a platform like Loxo, centralizing your data and having this like really solid source of truth. This becomes really, really important when we start to leverage AI in any capacity, because if you don't have good data, you cannot get good insights, and AI is powered by the data that you're feeding in. So can't state this enough. I'm sorry to beat a dead horse, but you need to start with centralizing and cleaning up your data. And this conversation is kind of irrelevant if you're not starting from that place. So that's step number one.
Yeah, no, it's so obvious, but y'all want to skip this step because it's not fun. You have to download all your data, like literally into the AI, the platform, whatever it is that you use, so it can inform that. Like, what was it? A couple weeks ago, I was writing a job description, and I just went straight to, we were using, I was using GPT for that one because I was just trying to brain dump into it. I was just like, what are the general requirements of this type of job? Here's what we want to accomplish, and it spit out just this very generic rough draft, which I knew it wasn't gonna be what I used, but I was just like, oh, I didn't give it any input into like what I actually need, what we're looking for, what makes up a good employee here, and everything else. I was like, of course, look at the input. It's only making general assumptions otherwise, or not making anything off of it, so it has nowhere to go. So yes, like related anecdotal story of just, you know, once you start getting into the detailed sections of, as a recruiter, it's like if you were to try to source people, but you're not telling it, okay, what's the makeup of the company, what makes someone successful there, like, yeah, don't be surprised when the outputs aren't great because the inputs aren't helping the cause.
Totally. And I think another piece of this conversation is when we're prompting, when we're, inputting information, we're not aware of the inherent implicit biases that we're kind of instilling into the way that we prompt. And so you're influencing the results and the responses that you get by the way that you actually engage with the tool in the first place. So from a data perspective, that's part of the mix, but then also from the way that you engage with asking the question or, searching for this information. That's another piece of the puzzle where starting to really like lock in and fine tune your prompting and learning how to do that well becomes really important too, if you're engaging with a GPT model or something like that. Okay, so the next phase, once you know that your data quality is there, it's where you need it to be, is to start getting into running high quality experiments and really making sure that we understand here that correlation does not equal causation. In his deck, Bock does a really great job of demonstrating some instances that he has seen play out of people, teams, really basing a lot of their decisions on correlation rather than causation, and not realizing that they're conflating the two. So one of them that he kind of references from his time at Google was referral bonuses. Google, instilled this 2x increase in referral bonuses, and it had no impact whatsoever on hiring. But in our minds, we think, oh, if we, increase referral bonuses, it will naturally mean that more people are going to, we're going to have an increase in hiring. No, they didn't see that there was any statistical correlation there. Fitness incentives, a lot of times, those who sign up are already most likely the people who are engaged in some kind of fitness program. In general, they're very health-minded. So you can't say that by instilling this, fitness incentive, you've actually started to create healthier people at your company.
Yeah.
And so like lots of these things where you can start to almost, again, create false equivalencies that aren't actually accurate. And then, there's harm in that in general of just like not being accurate, but then you're also starting to make decisions based off of faulty data. And that's something where, again, we see this a lot with the conversation around return to office. He makes the point of, a lot of people still are operating out of this mindset that people work better when they're in the office, when we've seen data has shown that hybrid models are actually proven to make people happiest. They also improve retention and reduce costs, overhead, all of that stuff. And there's been a 0% demonstrable impact on productivity in either direction. So it's one of those interesting things where it's like we just kind of have these assumptions that we're operating out of, and that is okay if you don't mind operating out of assumptions. But if you are starting to try to fine tune on these things and find truth, you have to start kind of like separating yourself from causation versus correlation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are interesting ones. And that's where it's tough, because you have to step back and ask yourself that question. Is just like, am I making assumptions here? Like, how can I validate if you aren't a stat major or you understand econometrics or any of that stuff, you know, how do you start to sift through that to understand, like, is this actually like a causation of it? Or is it just, you know, it's happening in parallel because behavior, this person already works out and they're like, oh, cool, I can get $50 back a month for the gym membership that I already buy. It's like, that's not leading to the healthier individual, like you said.
Exactly. Side note, I hated statistics in college. It was like the class that I hated the most. I'm like, I don't know if I reach my hand into the cooler if I'm going to get a Dr. Pepper or a Coke. How am I supposed to know? I don't know. No. It's random.
No. To this day, I'll still say something statistically significant. I have no idea if it's actually statistically significant. I just know, like, that's what people use.
It's significant, okay?
It's significant. It's significant
statistically or not.
But where it falls on that growth curve, I don't know. Gustavo on our team, he can tell me how wrong I am when I do that.
Exactly. Yeah. But this is why we surround ourselves with data people. Exactly. Even when we are not them. Yes. And that's actually a point that ties, we're getting a little ahead of ourselves, but I'll just bring it up now since this is relevant to the conversation. One of the points that Bock makes in this kind of outline of how to start integrating AI more effectively is to have a dedicated data/AI trailblazer who is really owning that process and is committed to understanding, one, how AI works within the context of your org specifically, your needs, your outputs, etc. But then who is also reporting that information out weekly to the rest of the team so that you guys can kind of react to that information in real time. But there's one person who's kind of the owner of data, AI, etc., and is kind of part of their job is keeping a finger on the pulse of how things are changing and how we can start integrating those changes. So I love this concept of, like, I'm starting to notice this even just across job openings, like someone kind of being in that seat of, you are like the owner of AI processes at our org, and you are the person that creates and defines how we use AI well and create structure around that so we have consistency across the org. One thing that we're seeing a lot of is, yes, people across companies are engaging with AI in very different ways, and thus they're receiving very different results. They're receiving very different answers as a result of that. And it's starting to create these questions and these inconsistencies across departments, across companies as a whole. And so having someone who is kind of the manager of that and can be aware of all of those inconsistencies starts to become more important. Almost like a people manager, like a head of HR, but head of AI.
Yeah, man. My head starts spinning with this stuff. There's so much unknowns in here that, like, I just need to see how this shakes out before I can even weigh in properly with it. I'm just like, it's a lot of stuff I've not thought about, but should be thinking about.
Totally. And he, kind of makes the point of the fact that learning and development becomes so important because teaching people how to learn matters more now than ever, because the days of being able to predict what skills your workforce will need, those are behind us. Like, it's natural at this point that we don't know what's coming next, and we need to be open to that and understand that the only way to prepare is really to just be very adept at learning and developing those skills in real time. So,
yeah. Well, I mean, we used to do all those personality tests. It's like openness, like the curiosity. Those, I bet, will be some of the biggest things that people really hire for moving forward, especially, like, we've talked about skills-based hiring and everything before, but yeah, if anyone are open to learning and it's easier than ever to access the right educational materials and everything else, like, that's literally the only barrier to having a great employee, the results that you're seeking as an organization. So yeah. Oh, this will be fun.
It'll be fun. It'll be interesting for sure. Okay, so let's get into running good experiments. This, I think, is really, really interesting and something that I'm hoping that people will be able to take a lot from this. So one thing that we've seen, at least so far, is that AI is better than humans at certain tasks. And at the very least, it's more efficient at those tasks than a human who is doing the exact same task. But there are tasks where AI suffers and the quality drop off is just really severe. One example that we can use as a demonstration of this is Klarna in December of 2024 laid off 22% of its workforce, saying that they were going to replace those employees with AI, primarily on their customer service team. In May of this year, a couple of months ago, they announced that they were starting to hire again for customer service roles because the CEO basically said AI agents weren't up to snuff yet. It just wasn't working out the way that they expected it to. So again, this is one of those moments where we have a faulty hypothesis. We're saying AI will make things more efficient. It will be able to answer customer concerns faster. So we should implement AI across the board. And we actually learn when we do so that that's not necessarily the case. So again, this was likely a very costly mistake. It also made there's a relationship breakdown that occurs where you probably had some great employees who are really bought in, who now they've been let go. They don't want to come back. We talked about boomerang hires on a recent episode. These are likely not going to be boomerang employees because they're like, why would I come back? Why would I trust that I'm not going to get laid off again in 6 months when you think a new AI tool is going to solve all your problems? Mm-hmm. So this is one of those things where it's like, if we can save people from making these mistakes before they're made, then we're creating really good systems and processes, and we're able to adapt in real time without just going off of vibes or going off of like what the conversation is right now.
Yeah. I mean, this gets back to something that we talk about all the time. I think most listeners also know as well, like supplement with AI, don't replace. Very rarely will you want to do a full-fledged like either human or AI, but more often it's just like, how can we do AI to do the research, the drudge work, the rough draft, the response to the commonly asked support question? Like, yes, use it for those, but as like to put yourself in the shoes of a customer, whether you're a customer of Klarna, customer of Loxo, customer of any software anywhere, there's nothing worse than when you have a question, you put it in, you're not getting the answer you want, and you're just like, oh, I need to talk to a human. Like, I just know you're not going to be able to answer. This isn't in your help document or something else, and it won't let you. Like, you just
press zero.
Yeah.
Let me talk to a representative.
And it's like, sorry, no one's available or anything else. It's like, if you want to send someone to market faster than anything else, do that. Like customer support, not having that for having a human or a relationship when you need one, that's your fastest ticket to losing a customer, a client, anything else like that.
100%. And one of the interesting slides in this deck actually talks about for certain tasks that are more strategy focused. They did a breakdown of human alone work, AI alone work, and then human helped by AI work. Mm-hmm. And actually,
cyborg.
Exactly, yeah, half and half, a little blend. They actually found that humans working on their own at strategy tasks were more effective and more efficient. AI on its own was the least or the lowest performer. And then AI plus human cyborg combo, those were like more effective than AI on its own, but less effective than human on its own. So with certain tasks, there's a level of discretion that you need to have around like, okay, is this something that should be fully human owned? Or do we kind of start to weave AI into the process in certain ways? So this is where, again, experimenting and not just going based off of assumptions of the best way to do this is by using AI to get me 90% of the way there, and then I'll close that gap. Maybe not. Maybe you shouldn't use AI in this process at all. Or maybe this is one that you can outsource entirely to AI. Those distinctions start to become important. Right now, they might not be, but as everyone starts adopting AI into their workflows and this becomes just table stakes, everyone's doing it, which we're reaching that inflection point. At that point, these differences do start to matter because they ladder up and they have a major impact. And again, they're starting to have an impact on other functions across the business. They're making, you're making decisions based off of these assumptions. And so this is where, again, good experiments matter. And do you have some thoughts before we start getting into good experiments?
Oh my God. Okay. I'm so glad that validates some things because that's fascinating. Like, I'm not surprised AI only doesn't do well. I was curious if you were going to go with human only or human plus AI. I think a lot of this depends on the maturity of when I say maturity, I mean like experience, skills of the individual, the organization, crafting that strategy. So an experienced strategist, they have their backlog, their catalog of their experiences, the evidence that they've collected over time. They also understand the organization that they work with, both quantitatively, which AI does great with, but also the qualitative, just like those gut feeling, the intuition-based items. And so when it comes to the strategy and doing well with it, I'm not surprised that the human only does best, because they have that full data set. When you look at the AI, I've noticed this sometimes when I've just used it to come up with a rough draft on whether it's like a long sequence, an outline of a document. If I let it do that, that then informs how I execute with it. And I follow the path that was set before me. And sometimes I look back and I'm like, actually, this isn't the direction that I wanted to go with this, or you have those. So that doesn't surprise me a little bit that it's not as effective, because you either have to double back as a human and replace some of the stuff that AI was doing, or the strategy just isn't the best. It's good, it'll do the job, but it's not the best for this role, this function, the goals, the organization that you're setting out with. So
totally.
Yeah, that's an interesting one right there. That's so validating. Okay, good to know.
I need to do more research on the study itself, because the way that they define it is AI is worse than humans at complex tasks, which that's kind of vague. So I don't know what that means exactly, but they measure it on a scale of correctness. And the control condition, aka the human only group, scored 84.5% on that correctness graph. Gen AI only scored 60%. And then Gen AI plus a human overview session, in which the human gave it a ton of information and then kind of refined from there, that was 70.6%. So still 14% less correct than the human only group. So I think, again, this is a great example of what you were just talking about. Like, we can be kind of led and swayed and influenced by the response that we get from the Gen AI tool that we're interfacing with. And then at that point, we take that as fact and start to implement that without really starting to apply, again, the human strategy and thought to that next step, that second step. So yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting things to come from that conversation and just kind of like where we take that knowledge.
Yeah. So there's someone that you and I both follow, well-written newsletter, and they said that they wrote their last newsletter just from a blank slate. They're like, I can't remember the last time that I started writing from a blank sheet in front of me versus having an AI outline. I was like, that's so interesting. And I think part of it's personal preference and everything else. Like, I'm sure that they brain dump a bunch of audio notes or different things in there. So it's not like, AI, what should I write about today? Like, they're doing that, but I don't know. I haven't gone that direction yet. So I'm always just like, why wouldn't you start with a blank page? Yeah. Part of that's what we grew up with. We don't have a choice but to do that. You remember our little blue books in English class? You had to like go and fill out those essays. God, those are the worst. My hand still hurts thinking about writing in that.
Carpal tunnel.
Yes, seriously. But yeah, it's so interesting when you think about that, because that's one of the things that I worry about the most after like the job description experiment, where I'm just like, if I let it craft my outline, yeah, I should go in and edit it. But I don't know. Those are like the different fears with AI and where things will lead. So just, yeah, interesting stuff. Completely kind of unhelpful fact.
Unhelpful maybe, but relatable for sure.
Relatable, yes. Relatable. Take what you want from it. A little side story. You can just fast forward through that last 5 minutes if you hadn't already yet.
Okay, so let's talk about good experiments. I think the first step in conducting an actually good AI experiment is, one, this is going to sound basic, but making sure it's tied to actual business value, tangible business value. So how do your key recruiting metrics align with broader business goals? I think it's really easy to take this for granted, but a lot of times we say, okay, if I could only do X, then Y would naturally follow. Let's start to kind of build more of a business case around why that's true and how we've seen that be true in the past, and start to analyze that data a bit more. One, so that we have a baseline understanding of how our performance is interacting with our business outcomes in our existing state, but then also so that we can just kind of really know for a fact what activities, what outputs do ladder up to, those outputs or those results that we're looking for. In that process of starting to analyze your current workflow and how that ladders up, starting to identify areas of high potential AI impact. These are things that we've talked about a lot over the course of, this podcast, and then also just like happening in the cultural conversation. But starting to look at your entire recruiting workflow and see where are your bottlenecks, where are areas where bias might exist, where are areas where you might be making a lot of assumptions about why things are working and why they're not. You might know that things are working, you might know that they're not working, but are you assuming a lot about the why in that, or do you know for a fact why? I think it's really easy to take those two things for granted. So starting to really be very critical of your process and doing that on a very personal level. I think we have these conversations in a way in which it's like, okay, like these are the typical areas where someone might bottleneck. These are the typical areas where we might see some lag in the process, but every single org, every single industry segment, et cetera, you guys probably are noticing different nuances there. So being really personal about this rather than very general and like looking at data as a whole from an industry or just kind of, market perspective can be really helpful here too, because so many of those assumptions are just based off of things we've heard other people say. And so it might be true, but it might not be also. And starting to look at your own process with like a fine-toothed comb, I think really starts to become important here. Ready for me to go to the next step, or do you have thoughts?
Yeah, that's where my questions are going to go straight into what I know you're going to get into.
Yeah. So I love this because it takes me back to the like middle school science class days of creating really specific testable hypotheses. I love a good if-then statement. So I think a lot of people in general, not just recruiters, but a lot of people are operating out of weak hypotheses, and they're using these weak hypotheses to make really important business decisions. So again, we use the Klarna example of, okay, AI is more efficient than humans. We've seen that to be true. So like if we replace all of our customer service reps with AI, then we'll be better at answering customer questions. No, not necessarily. That's a bad hypothesis to say AI will make recruiting better. Too general, not testable, not clearly defined in what outcome you even want to see. Better could mean a million different things. So creating a good hypothesis becomes really important here. And, an example of one good hypothesis could be implementing an AI-powered sourcing tool will increase the number of qualified candidates in the pipeline by 15% compared to traditional sourcing methods. So we're creating a very tight structure that we need to adhere to. I would argue that let's make this even more specific to a segment, an industry, a role, whatever it may be that we're really trying to analyze here. But the idea is you want to create a really, really tight, very testable hypothesis that doesn't leave a ton of room for maybes or questions or vagaries.
Yeah, let's break that down because I think that's worthwhile for a lot of the people listening and even us as we go through this. So like, as you say, weak hypothesis, AI is going to make our recruiting better. Like very broad, very vague, very unhelpful. Yes, directionally we think it'll be better, but how, where, when? Then you said your good hypothesis, implementing an AI-powered sourcing tool. So what use case within AI, because AI is so broad, like, okay, how are we leveraging AI and what fashion? Okay, we want to source candidates. It's going to increase the number of qualified candidates. Okay, so better. What does better look like? What's our better goal? So as you said, we want to get more qualified candidates in the pipeline by 15%. Okay, and then there's a tangible number. So qualified candidates and at what extent compared to a baseline, because that's how we're going to know. Again, statistical significance, we were talking about that. I don't know if it is, but it sounds like it's a good number to throw over. And then what's the baseline compared to traditional sourcing methods? So what we did before, we talk about all the time, like the gap is widening between traditional recruitment and talent intelligence. Like AI is definitely a big part of that. So yeah, I like how your good hypothesis is so detailed, because again, it's like in what facets it being used, what's the baseline, what's the goal, what use case. So yeah, just making sure that we're dialing in on that, because I think that's you're going to see it on both sides. Sometimes you'll have hypotheses that do work out well, but because you wrote such a garbage hypothesis in the beginning, like AI did help, but you don't know how or to what extent, or it was a bad hypothesis, which your experiment just wasn't set up right in the beginning. So of course it proved out to be invalid because there wasn't really any, like, you weren't setting it up and conducting it the right way.
Exactly. And this is, I think, one of the biggest points that needs to be made here is a good hypothesis is repeatable. So you're getting a takeaway out of one experiment, but then you also have a repeatable experiment that you can continue to conduct over different time periods, across different segments, across different kind of subsets of your business. So if it's not repeatable, it's likely not a good hypothesis. And so I think that is a good test, a good litmus test for like, okay, am I developing a flawed hypothesis here? Or is this something that's actually testable, repeatable, and will give me true information that I can make really powerful decisions based off of? And so, yes, like this 15% number, this is where I would say like, okay, tying this back to business values, if you're saying we need to see X% of growth, what are the different levers that we need to push or pull on in order to get to that point? That's how you would start to create those hypotheses and start to say like, this is what we want to see. This is what we expect to see. Now let's see if that's true.
Yeah. Okay. I like it. Data geek in me is like, yes, give me more.
So data geek will love this then. I think like, everyone's heard of an A/B test, but this is where, again, with a good hypothesis, you want to maintain a control group as you're conducting this experiment. So it's not just, okay, compared to what we've done in the past, but more so let's keep maintaining in a certain group, a control group, what we have done in the past so that we're reducing the variable of time, of like market conditions, of all of these factors that could create space for maybes. And we're saying, okay, we're going to introduce a treatment group now, which is the group that we're testing with. That's the group that we're going to introduce AI into and start to see how do these two compare over a very set period of time that is defined. There are limits to the experiment as a whole, clearly defined start and end points. I think that's a really important thing too. A lot of times people will just say, let's A/B test it. And there's no set period in which we're going to gather data. So this again plays into the repeatability. Like you can stop an experiment, analyze the findings, and then say, okay, actually the sample size here isn't large enough. We want to keep this going. We're going to, extend it for another 3 months or whatever. So yeah, A/B testing.
Yeah. And that was one that really stuck with me. The company you and I both work at last, we talked about this with experiments and marketing, was having clear exit criteria. A customer of ours, Elena Curia. So she talked about this at our London event last year, where it's the concept of exit criteria. So usually exit criteria is like success criteria of, we think that this is going to increase source candidates by 15%. But what happens when you see it's like, well, it's increased 5% and then it kind of plateaus or it doesn't quite get there? She's like, you also need to have a hard timestamp for just cutoff date. If you haven't seen significant results by this time, it's not insignificant, but it's not significant enough to warrant it, because otherwise we'll just let it keep going on, almost waiting to try to prove ourselves right. So yeah, having hard exit criteria, I think, is one of the most underrated things to keep in mind when experimenting for us. Many of us are novices when it comes to testing. Like, we know we should test, we do test, but are we truly constructing proper hypotheses, proper experiments, control groups, like entry, exit criteria, all of that? So yeah, that was a fun one that I think like that definitely changed how I approach experimentation, especially.
100%. Yeah. And again, this goes back to just, are you trying to prove a point, or are you trying to actually learn something that will influence like decisions moving forward? And so I think that if we go into this with the right mindset, we can experiment well. And so yeah, exit criteria I think is a great thing to keep in mind. Other things that we want to make sure we consider are, again, sample size, randomization of the data so that we're not able to bias the data and the results, isolation of variables, not testing too many things at once, but rather having one specific thing that we're trying to discover, and then creating different experiments for those other variables. And then clearly defined metrics for measuring the success of the experiment. So like, again, it's like, yes, we hope to get insights out of this, but then like, was that a beneficial experiment? Did that work? How could we refine our process in the future? That kind of thing. And then once the experiment is done, I think a really important step is to merge quantitative insights, the data that you got out of the experiment with qualitative insights. So observations from your recruiting team, the people who are actually doing the work. So what did you find? Like, was it easier? We see what the data is telling us, but like, what was your experience like? So we can start to make educated decisions that kind of factor in all of that. How happy is our team? How engaged are they? What were the conversations they were having? Like, that stuff is all really important too. So not getting so laser focused. So like, we have this data now and it's going to tell us everything we need to know and we're going to change everything as a result. It's like, no, like that's a really important piece of the puzzle, but let's also merge that with qualitative observations and insights that come from the practitioners, the people who are actually doing the work. Yeah.
So good. Okay. Well, this is a fun one. Philosophical.
Yes.
Not too dense, but good stuff to think about. Any parting thoughts before we wrap?
No, that's all I have to say. Start testing, but do it the right way. That's my lesson of the day.
Yes, we'll take
simple.
it. All right. Well, as always, appreciate you coming with some good topics, things for us to think about. And yeah, hopefully this gives our listeners something to chew on as this age of AI just continues. So as we wrap, Becoming a Hiring Machine is a production of Loxo. If you like this episode and you're not sure where to go next, we have a link to a similar one, and you can find that within the show notes in the description of your favorite podcast streaming platform, as well as on our website. Full video episodes are available on YouTube. If you ever have questions, send them our way, podcast@loxo.co. And lastly, if you did like this episode, please make sure to leave us a quick rating in your podcast streaming platform. It takes you 3 seconds, and it's going to help other recruiters like you to find us. So, all right, everyone, that's the show. It's another great Trending Topics episode with Lex. Until next time, bye, y'all.